Hello everyone. For those that have not met me before or seen me before, my name is Kumu and I will be taking you through task B and G for the March 2022 assessment. Right, let's get straight into it. First, task B. So let's talk about what task B was about. Of course, in this reflection video, we will be working through the pre-released information. Then in our last session, we will talk about the information on the day. So focusing on document 3 in the pre-released information, this was an email from the CEO to the senior financial assistant. So the email was about the review of internal audit reports. You can already get the sense when you look at the heading of this email. What is this task about? It could be about internal audit reports. What do we use the internal audit reports for? What are the contents of the internal audit reports? And how can that be used by somebody else to make a decision? So let's see what the task was about. So it was, dear senior financial accountant, welcome to the Limpros group. I trust that you are settling into your new role following my earlier discussions with Susan Svanda. We agreed that it would be appropriate that I forward this matter to you. So some background. With the expansion of Limpros Group, the board decided to establish an internal audit division. So the moment you see internal audit division, you're thinking, okay, do I know enough about internal audit? What is internal audit? How does it differ from external audit? What are the processes in the internal audit? So that becomes key and very important for the group in January 2020 under the leadership of Tiny Ndlovu. The aim of the division is to enhance Limpros' ability to monitor the effectiveness of the internal control system. Already it's ringing bells that are closer to external audit. Effectiveness of the internal control systems. What does that mean? What is the system of internal control? You are wondering, what are the components? What exactly do the internal auditors test in order to come to the conclusion that the internal control systems are effective? If I think across all business cycles, what do they look at? That becomes the key question, isn't it? And the adherence thereto across multiple Limpros sites. Okay, so you're also thinking about how people are adhering to the internal controls at Limpros. Now, internal audit typically conducts tests on a specific control using a sample, say 10 to 12 transactions. Now you're thinking, okay, so how do they sample? If they get an error in the sample, how do they extend the sampling? What do you consider in sampling, right? This is another trigger that is coming through, sampling. They will then calculate what percentage of the sample included in control deviations. Now, what control deviations, right? Is this similar to my ISO 265 communicating deficiencies in internal control? When there are control deviations, what do we mean? We mean you've moved from what the control is saying, right? And report on that together with the details of these control deviations. Now you're thinking, what does that report look like? How do internal auditors report on deviations or internal controls? If I compare this to the external audit way of doing it, is it similar? What does it look like? What are the considerations? And this is research that you need to do if you've never seen one. Okay, and still in document 3, the CEO now goes deeper. The CEO actually tells you, here is the concern. So while Limpros has invested a fair amount of resources in the internal audit division, we as executive management are not convinced that Limpros is seeing the full benefits from the internal audit division's work. So now you're wondering, you're thinking about it, what are the benefits of having an internal audit function? What is the purpose of the internal audit function? How does it function? How does it operate? And specifically, when I read the internal audit division's reports, I get the sense that they are just factually reporting their findings, but leave it to the audit and risk committee and or management to interpret the results and find and implement the required solutions. So now you're thinking, okay, factual findings report. Is the internal audit function supposed to operate as an agreed upon procedure, which is an internal finding, or it needs to go deeper than that? What is the root cause of this? How is it supposed to be fixed? What is the level of deviation or weakness in internal controls? Is it weak? Is it very strong? Can I rate it? What exactly are they now looking at? So in the even if you think about King 4, for example, in your Principle 15, your combined assurance, is that the intention of the internal audit to just say, here are the findings, right? No, why are they being employed? And remember, the internal audit works for management and they need to add value to management. And here management is saying, we don't see the value, right? Okay, so let's read on. Moreover, I have not yet seen a decline in our external audit fees as a result of the internal audit work that is being undertaken. Now, this is one that is perhaps maybe a bit more controversial, right? Does it necessarily mean that the audit fees will decline if the internal audit function is working properly? So what could be the issue here? You could have to consider ISO 610 using the work of internal auditors. Maybe this is what the executive is referring to, right? How or to what extent can the external auditors feed from the work that the internal auditors are performing so that they also reduce their number of hours on the audit, right? But now you're considering that, well, the external audit doesn't necessarily just do that. There's certain considerations for them to even think about it, or even to use the internal auditors in their work, in their direct assistance, etc., and all those things. So it's something that becomes very important. Your knowledge of ISO 610, your knowledge of what the internal auditors do. Then the executive goes on, the CEO, I am waiting for the documentation from the upcoming audit and risk committee meeting, but from the provisional agenda, I can see that the internal audit will be presenting reports on work done in the following areas. Now, these are two big triggers. General IT controls. Now you know that I need to think about internal controls, general IT controls. I need to update my understanding thereof. The procurement system, with another way of saying it, acquisitions and payment cycle. So that becomes important. You need to know what is involved in that particular cycle. Please book some time in your diary for next week to review these reports. Now, you see that a review is coming. It could come. In the information on the day, you might be asked as a task to review these reports that deal with general IT controls and the procurement system, which means that in your review, you need to think about the benefits that the internal audit function will bring and the usefulness of those reports. So if you have no clue whatsoever about general IT controls, it's time to update that understanding. If you have forgotten about the risks in the procurement system, the controls in the procurement system, it's time to revisit that work. I need you to advise me on the types of questions that I should be asking to ensure that Limpros obtains maximum benefit from these reports. Your review could alert us to whether further work is needed to provide more meaningful conclusions to the Audit and Risk Committee. Okay, so let's summarize what we just read. Of course, see some triggers: internal audit, effectiveness of internal control system, testing using samples, control deviations, decline in external audit fees, so the link between internal and external audits. Internal audit presenting reports specifically on general IT controls and procurement system. Your area is audit. What do you need to do when you see this information? You need to know that I need to update understanding of internal audit function, update my understanding of ISO 610, update knowledge and understanding of general IT controls. And this is deliberate, knowledge and understanding, not just your understanding, because general IT controls can go deep. Update your understanding of the acquisitions and payment cycle, including the controls that are in the cycle and the risks of fraud in the cycle. How do you deal with those risks? Research on the contents of internal audit reports. So if you've never seen one and you know that somebody needs help with review of that internal audit report and you've never seen one, it's time to research. What does it look like? What are the contents? And why do we have these contents in that internal audit report? Update understanding of ISO 265, communicating deficiencies in internal controls to those charged with governance and management. What are the contents of those of that set of communication? That becomes very important. Then you take a step back and say, okay, so what could be the task about? Well, you could be asked to review the internal audit reports on work done for general IT controls and the procurement system. You could be asked to provide recommendations for the consideration of the use of the work of internal auditors by the external auditors. Recommend additional work that should be performed. And these are things you start thinking about as you do your research. Okay, So let's talk about Task G, the pre-released information. Task G was all about governance. So again, this was an email from the CEO to the senior financial assistant, and it was about land acquisition. And here the CEO was saying, well, our bankers won't fund the purchase of the property that we want to buy and the development of the property either. The bankers also noted that countrywide enrollments are going down because of many families that are emigrating. We're also told the story of people moving to public schools rather than private schools. So what does this mean for the company? First things first, we're actually thinking about if it was audit, could there be any matters to consider when it comes to risks of material misstatements? Could they have a reason to misstate results to get this funding? It's possible, right? So it's something that you just consider. However, the bigger issue was on the actions that they are proposing. So the CEO clearly says this leaves Limpros in an awkward position, but the chairperson of the board, Shanice, is suggesting that Limpros directors band together to fund the purchase of the land. So directors giving money to the company to fund the purchase of the land. Now you're already taking a step back and saying, okay, is this possible and how does it work? What are the legal implications? It is expected that the land will cost 20 million rand, which is certainly affordable for Shanice and Rose Williams, an independent non-executive director. Now, the moment Rose does this, Rose is no longer independent, right? Shanice has suggested that Limpros could either enter into a long-term lease with the directors or purchase the land at fair value at some stage in the future. So now you're thinking, okay, it's the directors giving financial assistance, not the other way around that we're used to seeing when it comes to the Companies Act. Now, the CEO is asking you to apply your mind to the legalities of Limpros entering into the above suggested arrangement with some of its directors. Don't worry about the taxation and accounting implications. So you're not even thinking IS-24 related parties, right? But rather focus on the corporate governance issues. So now you're thinking, okay, what does King 4 say? What does the Companies Act say? And they specifically say, and any Companies Act implications. Thank you in advance. So now you need to take a step back and say, okay, how does this work in terms of the Companies Act? How does this work in terms of King 4, for example? Zoom into what you would need to do, right? Of course, you need to think about the conflict of interest of the directors. You need to think about transactions with the directors, or if there are any payments, if it ends up being a remuneration to the directors, what are the implications, personal financial interest of directors, and more importantly, standards of directors' conduct. You're thinking about acting in the best interest of the entity, acting with a degree of care, skill, and due diligence, acting in good faith. You're already thinking that, okay, if they are going to be involved in anything that they've got interest in, what are the considerations in terms of the Companies Act? What is allowed, what is not allowed? What can the shareholders agree to, what can't they agree to? And the story goes on. And after you updated your understanding, you're also thinking, well, in corporate governance, what does King 4 say? If you zoom into principle 1, you zoom into principle 13 in terms of laws and regulations. Principle 1, you're talking about ethical leadership. So ethics is the center of this, and you're thinking about it. What could you be asked? Well, you could be asked to review the proposed plans, right, in relation to the Companies Act and good corporate governance practices, provide recommendations on way forward, and you're thinking about how does this impact the governance of the entity, as well as the ethics, if you think about it. Right, so we will see how this unfolds as we discuss it live in the information of the day review in our live session. Okay.